So imagine you are standing at a crowded networking event. You're holding one of those tiny plastic plates with like a scoop of chip dip on it.
Oh, yeah. Always the awkward chip dip.
Right. And someone you've never met walks up, shakes your hand, and asks that standard, completely inevitable question.
No, sir.
So what do you do?
The dreaded question.
Exactly. You open your mouth, you say your job title out loud, and in that exact second, this massive wave of dread just washes over you. You realize, standing right there next to the snack table, that you absolutely despise your own life.
It's a terrifying moment of clarity, honestly, and it happens to so many people who have done everything, correctly on paper.
Yeah, and that is actually the literal origin story of a highly successful graphic designer named Manoj Chintamarakshan. Because he had the well-paying job, he had just bought his absolute dream motorcycle. By every external metric, he had completely arrived.
But internally, it was a different story.
Completely. At that party, when he was forced to introduce himself with his job title, he had this full-blown identity crisis. The label didn't just feel wrong, it felt like a betrayal of who he actually was.
And that friction is a really profound indicator. His internal map was completely disconnected from the external reality he had spent years building. And, well, that disconnect is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Because as someone who loves to learn, you are probably consuming massive amounts of information all day, right? You're listening to deep dives, you're staying on top of industry news, just absorbing all this external data. But our mission for this deep dive is to turn that curiosity inward.
Which is often the hardest part.
It is. We are exploring a psychological operating system designed to map your own mind. It's based on Manoj's framework in his book, 55 Questions Across 8 Dimensions for a New You.
Right, and we're also layering in some really practical applications from reviews by Shortform and Elevate Society. Plus, we're bringing in the clinical, holistic frameworks of the 8 dimensions of wellness from Marshall University and CU Boulder.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. But the goal here is not just, philosophical daydreaming. We're looking at a structured coaching-style method to shift you from chronic overthinking into raw, practical execution.
I love that. So let's start with what actually happened to Manoj after that party. The realization shook him so deeply that he literally quit his job. He took a solo trip to North India and he began studying NLP.
Neurolinguistic programming.
Right, NLP. And eventually, he completely reinvented his career and founded an e-commerce platform called The Positive Store. But the main catalyst was that initial identity crisis.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense that he gravitated toward NLP. For those who might be unfamiliar, neurolinguistic programming is essentially the practice of understanding how the language we use internally, the stories we tell ourselves, the labels we attach to our identities, how that literally rewires our brain's behavior.
So change the words, change the brain.
Exactly. If you change the internal language, you change the physical output. And that brings us to the foundational layer of his entire framework, which is self-discovery. Because before you can build a new life, you basically have to audit your current one.
And there's a quote in the book that captures this audit perfectly. Manoj writes, "Trying to change the outside world rather than trying to focus on themselves is like trying to change the image in the mirror rather than themselves."
It's such a great visual.
Isn't it? Think about how absurd that actually is. You wake up, you look in the mirror, and there is this huge smudge of dirt on your cheek. You wouldn't grab a cloth and start aggressively wiping the glass of the mirror to get the dirt off, right?
No, obviously not.
You have to wipe your own face.
It sounds so obvious when you frame it like that. But consider how many of us spend our entire lives frantically wiping the mirror. We change jobs, we move to new cities, we upgrade our cars or our wardrobes. We're constantly trying to fix a deep dissatisfaction that is actually rooted internally. The smudge is on us.
Yeah, the smudge is on us. So to figure out what's actually on your face, the book lays out several specific questions. Early on, it asks a pretty heavy one, just simply, who am I?
Which is a tough one to start with.
It really is, but then it gets much more granular. Like question 9 asks, what makes you lose track of time? I find that one fascinating because it just completely cuts through all the resonate bullet points.
Oh, absolutely. That question is a direct backdoor into the psychological state of flow. When you lose track of time, your brain actually enters a state of transient hypofrontality.
Okay, wait, hold on. Transient hyperfrontality. Let's translate that.
Yeah, sorry, clinical term. It simply means the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for overanalyzing, self-doubt, and, monitoring the passage of time, it temporarily downregulates.
So it just takes a break.
Exactly, it takes a break. And when that inner critic goes quiet, your brain is fully, joyfully engaged in the task at hand. So identifying what triggers that state for you is a massive indicator of your natural strengths, completely stripped of, like, societal expectations or financial pressures.
Okay, so we figure out what we love. But self-image isn't just about passions, right? It's built on the foundation of our beliefs and our values. And this is where I have to admit I got a little confused because Manoj takes a very unexpected turn here.
You mean with the negative questions?
Yeah. Question 23 asks, what irritates you the most? My first instinct is to say, well, why focus on the negative? Shouldn't a safe improvement framework focus on joy and gratitude and all that?
It definitely feels counterintuitive, but it is an incredibly effective psychological tool. What irritates you actually acts as a reverse compass.
The reverse compass.
Yeah, it highlights your hidden boundaries and your core, non-negotiable values. For instance, if you are deeply irritated by a colleague who is chronically late, it's rarely just about the clock.
Right, it's about what the lateness represents.
Exactly. That irritation reveals that you place a highly premium value on respect and integrity. If micromanagement drives you crazy, it shows you deeply value autonomy. Your raw frustrations are often the most honest reflection of your value system.
Wow, that shifts the perspective entirely. You find out what you stand for by paying attention to what you absolutely won't stand for.
Precisely.
But then, Manoj doesn't just stick to frustrations. He pivots to something that sounds almost like a joke. Question 32 asks, what is your favorite animal and why? When I read that, I was like, am I taking a personality quiz in the back of a teen magazine?
It definitely has that playful vibe, I agree. But the underlying mechanism is a real technique called psychological priming. Successful people frequently use vivid imagery to channel specific emotional states before big tasks.
So how does the animal fit in?
Well, let's say your answer is a lynx, and you describe it as sleek, assertive, and hyper-focused. When you are about to step into a high-pressure negotiation, superimposing the traits of that lynx onto yourself can actually shift your physiology. It literally lowers your heart rate, straightens your posture, and acts as a fast track to adopting confidence.
That is wild. Okay, so we have looked in the mirror. We know our core values based on our irritations, and we are, channeling our inner links. We have established our identity.
Which brings us to the next phase.
Right, because having an identity without a clear direction brings us to a crucial pivot in this operating system, charting the destination. Because knowing yourself without having a goal is like building a $10,000 liquid-cooled custom high-performance PC, but having absolutely no software to run on it.
That's a great way to put it.
You have all this incredible processing power, but it's just sitting there generating heat, doing nothing.
A beautiful machine doing absolutely nothing. And the overarching philosophy for this stage comes from a concept by Tony Robbins that Manoj highlights. Clarity is power, because vague goals produce vague results.
Right. If the destination is fuzzy, the execution is going to be fuzzy. So the book asks questions like, what fulfills me as an individual, and what would happen if I achieve this goal? But then it pushes way past just the internal feelings of pride or success.
It gets into the sensory stuff.
Yeah. Question 20 specifically asks, what would you see, hear, and feel once you achieve this goal?
And this is where we move from wishful thinking to actual neurological programming. The human brain actually struggles immensely with abstract concepts, like financial freedom is abstract, being successful is abstract.
The brain doesn't really know what to do with that.
No, it doesn't know how to metabolize those words into daily motivation. But the smell of fresh coffee on a Tuesday morning in a house you own, or feeling the grain of a specific wooden desk under your hands, that is concrete.
But why does the brain need the feeling of the wooden desk? Like, what does that actually do?
It activates your reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Oh.
Your RAS is essentially the filter in your brain that decides what information to let in and what to ignore. When you provide your brain with highly specific sensory details of your goal, you program the RAS to start noticing opportunities in your environment that align with that reality.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. It encodes the goal as a tangible destination, which dramatically increases your unconscious drive to achieve it.
That makes the whole concept of a vision board seem a lot less mystical and a lot more scientific. So we have the vivid sensory destination. But the brain is smart. It knows a dream isn't reality yet. How do we anchor that dream to the ground so the brain actually believes it's achievable?
Well, that requires an audit of our opportunities. Pragmatism has to take over here. Excuses are the enemy of execution.
Question 35 asks bluntly, what resources do you have currently to achieve your goals?
And I actually want to pause on that word resources because almost every time we hear it, our brains just default to one thing, right?
Yeah.
Money.
Yes, always money. We think, do I have the capital to start this? But Manoj makes it very clear that a resource is literally anything you can leverage. Like a local library with free Wi-Fi is a massive resource.
Absolutely.
A quiet apartment at 5 a.m. before the rest of the world wakes up is a resource. A relative who can watch your kids for 2 hours on a Saturday is a highly valuable resource. We often possess significantly more leverage than we realize once we, stop equating resources solely to a bank balance.
Time, environment, and relationships are all forms of capital you can spend. And identifying them transitions us from planning into the most demanding phase of this entire deep dive, the engine of execution.
This is where we leave the journaling behind.
Right.
Because a destination and a map are completely useless if you never take a step.
Right.
The guiding philosophy here is a really blunt quote from Gary Vee that's included in the text. Ideas are shit, execution matters.
It is aggressive, sure, but it cuts through the illusion of productivity. Overthinking is a trap that disguises itself as progress. You can spend 3 years researching the absolute perfect workout routine and never actually lift a single weight.
So how do we force ourselves into execution? Manoj suggests reverse engineering time. Questions 40 through 43 walk you backward. You don't just ask what you want eventually. You ask, what do I want to achieve in 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, this week?
You're chopping it down.
Yeah, you take this massive, intimidating sensory goal and slice it into immediate, actionable tasks that you can do, like before dinner.
The problem, of course, is that the moment we try to take those immediate actions, we slam headfirst into our existing bad habits.
Which is so incredibly frustrating. Question 46 asks what new habits you should follow. But let me push back here a bit. Say I want to stop eating junk food late at night. Telling myself I will eat carrots instead rarely works.
Almost never.
Even when we have the 6-month plan and we know our values, we still find ourselves sitting on the couch doing the exact thing we swore we wouldn't. Why does willpower fail so spectacularly?
Because a habit isn't just a random action you can simply decide to stop. A habit is an ingrained neurological loop. It's a cue, a routine, and a reward. And it's heavily inspired by your underlying beliefs. You cannot just, willpower a deeply entrenched habit out of existence.
Because nature abhors a vacuum.
Yes. If you just try to stop doing something, your brain will panic and rush to fill the void, usually with the old behavior.
Okay, so how do we actually swap the behavior without the brain panicking?
To build a new habit, you must actively destroy the old one, using a very specific physical substitute. Let's use the goal of waking up early to work on a side project. You can't just tell yourself, I want to go to sleep earlier tonight.
Right, because that's too vague.
Exactly. It leaves room for negotiation at 10:30 p.m. You have to create a physical barrier to the old habit. You say, I will be in bed by 9:30 p.m. and I will physically leave my laptop and my phone on the desk in the other room. You replace the vague desire with a concrete physical action that completely removes the trigger of the bad habit.
So you were manipulating your own environment so you don't even have to rely on willpower.
Exactly.
But even with environmental design, long-term motivation eventually fades. The initial excitement wears off and the reality of the daily grind just sets in.
Which is exactly why question 51 asks, who is your coach? The framework strongly recommends against doing this massive life overhaul in isolation. It focuses heavily on accountability.
Wait, but if I have absolute clarity on my goals and I've designed my environment like we just talked about, why do I still need someone else watching over my shoulder?
It comes back to neurology again. The human brain heavily prioritizes short-term rewards and immediate comfort. From an evolutionary standpoint, conserving energy was a survival mechanism. So when the dread of hard, complex work sets in, your brain will flood you with incredibly convincing rationalizations to just quit.
Oh, I know those rationalizations well.
Right, just watch one more episode. Or let's push the deadline to tomorrow.
So you're saying we literally can't trust our own brains in the moment of fatigue?
Exactly that. That is when you need an accountability partner. You are essentially outsourcing your willpower to someone else for the moments when yours is depleted. But, and this is a big but, the caveat here is vital. You cannot just pick your best friend.
Oh, because your best friend loves you and will let you off the hook. They'll say, oh, you've worked so hard, you deserve a break.
That is the worst kind of accountability. You need a partner whose own traits align with your ambitions, someone who has a track record of ruthless execution in their own life. You need a person who is comfortable holding your feet to the fire when your short-term brain tries to sabotage your long-term goals.
Okay, so we have built a pretty intense machine here. We've audited our identity, we've set a vivid sensory destination, we've found our hidden resources, we are reverse engineering our timelines, replacing bad habits physically, and answering to a strict accountability partner.
It's a powerful setup.
It is. We are pushing the processor to its absolute limits. But if you run that high-performance PC at maximum capacity indefinitely, the system crashes.
Relentless execution inevitably leads to burnout. If you only focus on the grind, you will break down. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most overlooked layer of the framework, holistic balance and celebration.
Yeah, questions 52 through 55 in the book are entirely focused on this. It asks, what were your biggest achievements this year? And what are the milestone celebrations? The underlying philosophy here is anchored by a brilliant quote from Earl Nightingale. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal.
The word progressive is the linchpin of that quote. It reframes success from being a finish line that you cross, 10 years from now, into something that is happening right now in the process of doing the work.
It forces you to stop the machine, step back, and throw a mini party for yourself. But how do we measure if we are actually sustaining this new version of ourselves, or if we are just masking burnout with a nice dinner?
This is where the frameworks from our university sources, Marshall University and CU Boulder, provide a really critical diagnostic tool. They utilize an 8 dimensions of wellness assessment. They argue that true success is never just occupational or financial.
They categorize wellness into 8 specific areas, right? Emotional, social, spiritual, physical, intellectual, environmental, occupational, and financial.
Yes. And the reason universities map human wellness this way is strictly physiological and neurological. The systems are all interlinked. Let's say you are executing flawlessly on your business goals. So your occupational and financial scores are a perfect 10. But because you are grinding 80 hours a week, you have isolated yourself. Your social and physical scores drop to a 2.
What happens under the hood when those scores drop, like physically?
Your nervous system starts to fail. The human body requires social bonding to regulate stress hormones like cortisol. Without that social release valve, the occupational stress you are generating doesn't dissipate. It just accumulates in your system.
That sounds dangerous.
It is. Eventually, that unmitigated cortisol fries your cognitive function, your sleep deteriorates, and your occupational output, which is the very thing you sacrifice everything for, it just collapses. You cannot selectively ignore dimensions of your wellness without the whole system eventually failing.
So it's not just about feeling balanced in some abstract way. It's about structural integrity. How do we practically use that university framework alongside Minogui's 55 questions?
The diagnostic method is actually beautifully simple. You look at those 8 areas, and you use your gut reaction to grade yourself from 1 to 10 in each category right now. A 1 means it is in crisis. A 10 means it is thriving. The visual of those scores immediately shows you where the engine is running too hot.
And once you see the low scores, you identify the top 3 dimensions you need to boost. You write down the specific changes you will make, like, say, setting a hard stop at 6:00 p.m. to improve your social dimension, and then you plan a 3-month and 6-month check-in. It basically becomes an ongoing maintenance schedule for your life.
Exactly. It ensures that the person who eventually arrives at the destination is actually healthy enough to enjoy those sensory rewards they planned for.
Let's pull all of this together. We have explored a pretty comprehensive psychological operating system today. We started by wiping the smudge off our own face to uncover our true identity, using our frustrations as a compass for our values. Then we charted the route by setting vivid sensory goals so our brain knows exactly what to look for, and we found the hidden leverage in our daily lives. We built the engine of execution by reverse engineering our timeline, physically designing our environment to replace bad habits, and outsourcing our willpower to a strict accountability partner.
A ruthless one, ideally.
Yes, very ruthless. And finally, we learned to sustain the journey by constantly auditing our 8 dimensions of wellness so the system doesn't just crash and burn.
It really is a remarkable blueprint. But, as the reviews from both Short-Form and Elevate Society emphatically point out, the true power of this deep dive isn't just in absorbing the concepts intellectually. The actual psychological transformation requires you to sit down and physically write these answers out on paper.
You have to externalize the internal data.
Yes. Writing it down forces the brain to process the information differently. It breaks through the fog of self-deception, and it forces you to confront the very real gap between the life you are living and the life you claim you want.
Which perfectly brings us to one final, slightly morbid, but intensely clarifying thought experiment from the source material. I want you to imagine that you were to pass away today, and the person engraving your headstone was given all the material of your life. Every action, every habit, every excuse, exactly as it has been lived up to this exact moment to describe who you were. What would they actually write?
That is heavy. It strips away all your future potential, all your unexecuted ideas, and leaves only the concrete reality of your actions.
But the real kicker is the second half of the question. What would they write based on today? And what would you want them to write at the very end? I want you to seriously ponder that gap, because bridging the space between what is true today and what you want written at the end is exactly what this psychological operating system is built for. So find a pen, answer the hard questions, and start executing.